Why did the room fall silent the moment she spoke? Not because she raised her voice, but because she did. The briefing room had heard every kind of sound over the years. Orders barked, arguments sharpened, careers ended with a cough and a cleared throat, but silence like this, that was rare. This silence was the kind that arrived uninvited, stayed too long, and forced everyone inside it to look at themselves. She sat near the wall, not at the table, never at the table. That had been decided long before she arrived. A simple blue t-shirt beneath a civilian jacket, no rank on her chest, no ribbons, no visible history, just a notebook, a pen, and a posture that suggested she was used to waiting. The general had meant it as a joke. That was the thing no one wanted to say out loud afterward. He hadn't intended cruelty. He hadn't intended revelation. He'd just been filling air. So, he said, leaning back in his chair, boots crossed, confidence spilling into the space. We're trusting this operation to, what was it, 37 confirmed kills. A ripple of chuckles moved through the room, controlled, respectful, nervous. She didn't smile. The general smirked, tapping the folder in front of him. That's a lot of weight for one person to carry. Hope she's not sentimental. That was when she lifted her head. Not fast, not dramatically, just enough. Her eyes didn't challenge him, they didn't flinch either. They simply met his and held. I don't carry them, she said calmly. They carried me. No one breathed. The general laughed once, uncertain. I'm sorry. The names, she continued. Her voice wasn't cold. It was steady, like water that had learned how to wait. They carried me through things I wouldn't have survived alone. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else glanced at the door. The general straightened slightly. This isn't. You joked about confirmed kills, she said, still seated, still quiet. I assumed you wanted to know what they meant. Her hands rested on her knees, scarred still. That was when the room began to change. Not all at once, slowly, like pressure building behind glass. Because there was something in her tone that didn't ask for permission, something that didn't demand respect. It simply existed. And existence, when it's undeniable, is uncomfortable. She hadn't planned to speak today. That was the truth. She had learned long ago that silence was safer. Silence didn't provoke curiosity. Silence didn't invite memory. Silence didn't force people to confront the cost of the things they joked about. But something about the way he said it, lightly, carelessly, had brushed against a place she kept sealed. A place with names. She inhaled, exhaled. I was 19 the first time, she said. It wasn't clean. It wasn't heroic. I didn't sleep for 3 days afterward. The general opened his mouth, then closed it. The projector hummed uselessly behind him. I learned something early, she continued. If you joke about weight you've never lifted, it eventually finds a way to land in your hands. She stood then. Not abruptly, with the patience of someone who understood gravity. And for the first time, the people in that room realized something they should have noticed sooner. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She already had. The general cleared his throat. That's enough. She nodded. You're right, it is. She turned toward the door, toward silence again, toward safety. But the silence didn't follow her. It stayed behind. And it would not let them forget. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in a room isn't a weapon. It's the truth spoken without anger. What kind of person leaves a room knowing they just changed everything, and feels no relief at all? She didn't go far, just down the corridor, past the framed photographs of men shaking hands, past medals frozen in glass, past history curated to look clean. Her reflection followed her in the polished floor, blue t-shirt, calm face, eyes that looked older than her body had any right to be. Her hands shook once, just once. She clenched them, released. That was the cost of speaking. People thought silence was weakness, but silence was discipline. Silence was how you survived when you carried too much to explain. She had learned that in places without windows. She stopped near a bench and sat. The hum of the building wrapped around her, distant footsteps, a phone ringing somewhere, life continuing oblivious. She exhaled slowly. She hadn't planned to tell them anything real, certainly not that, certainly not in front of him. The general had a reputation, decorated, respected, untouchable, a man whose words were quoted and whose jokes were repeated by people who wanted to belong. And for years she had let him speak. Because silence kept her invisible. Invisibility kept her alive. Her phone vibrated. One message. Unknown number. Stay where you are. She frowned, looked up. At the end of the corridor stood a man she recognized but had never spoken to. Younger, sharper eyes, less polish. He approached slowly, as if sudden movement might break something. "You weren't supposed to do that," he said quietly. "I know. Do you understand what you just did?" "Yes." He studied her, then why? She considered lying. It would have been easier. "I got tired," she said instead, "of pretending that words don't weigh anything." He nodded once. They're convening again without him. She looked back toward the briefing room. Something in her chest tightened, not fear, not pride. Responsibility. "Will you come back?" he asked. She stood. "Not to explain," she said, "but to finish." He didn't ask what that meant. Because some things don't need clarification. They need courage. Did she regret surviving when others didn't, or was survival its own sentence? The room felt different when she re-entered, smaller, closer, like the walls had leaned in to listen. The general was gone. Folders were open, screens active, voices low. No one laughed now. She returned to her place by the wall. The younger officer nodded to her. "We need context," he said, "not numbers, meaning." She hesitated. This was the moment silence usually won. Instead she spoke. "They weren't monsters," she said, "most of them." A few people looked down. They were tired, afraid, following instructions written by people who would never meet them. She paused, let that sit. "I didn't keep count because I wanted to. I kept count because if I didn't, they would disappear, and disappearing is the second death." Her voice softened. "I remember their hands, the way fear sounds before it becomes resolve, the way quiet settles after." She swallowed. No one tells you that surviving means carrying everyone who didn't. No one interrupted her. "People like to joke about confirmed kills," she continued, "because jokes create distance. Distance makes it easier to sleep." She looked around the table. But distance doesn't erase consequence. The younger officer closed his folder slowly. "We need you," he said, "not for what you did, for what you understand." She nodded once. Not proudly. Willingly. When the truth finally settles, why does it feel heavier than the lie? The report would take weeks. Investigations, reviews, quiet conversations behind closed doors. The general would never joke that way again. Not publicly, not privately. And she would fade back into the background. That was always the agreement. She left the building as the sun dipped low, the sky the color of old steel. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked ordinary. She liked that. Ordinary meant unnoticed. Unnoticed meant peace. As she walked, her phone vibrated again. One message. "Thank you." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some acknowledgments don't require response. They require remembrance. Did redemption arrive all at once, or did it arrive quietly, disguised as rest? Weeks later, she stood at a range, empty, quiet. Blue t-shirt, calm breath. She fired once. Center. lowered the weapon, exhaled. She wasn't chasing perfection anymore. She was practicing release. She packed up and left without ceremony. At home, she cooked slowly, ate deliberately. Outside, life moved forward. Inside, something finally rested. Why did the silence follow her, even after the door closed behind her? It should have broken the moment the briefing room disappeared from view. That was how it usually worked. Doors shut, words stayed behind, and the world returned to its familiar noise. But this time, the quiet clung to her like static. It pressed against her ears as she walked, slow and deliberate, down the long Pentagon corridor where history was framed, polished, and carefully edited. Her boots made almost no sound. She had learned that habit long before civilian floors and fluorescent lights. Even now, her body moved as if the building itself were listening. She passed photographs of smiling officers shaking hands with presidents, past plaques engraved with dates that meant nothing without context, past flags folded into perfect triangles, resting behind glass like symbols that had forgotten the cost of being earned. She stopped only once, briefly, when her reflection caught her by surprise, not because she didn't recognize herself, but because she did. Same eyes, same stillness, same controlled distance between thought and expression. The blue t-shirt looked almost out of place here. Too simple, too honest. No insignia to explain who she was. No rank to warn people how carefully they should speak around her. Just fabric and skin and a history that refused to be visible unless invited. Her hands tightened at her sides, relaxed. She told herself she hadn't crossed a line. She had only corrected the room. Words had weight. She'd reminded them of that. Still, something in her chest refused to settle. She reached a quiet alcove near a window that looked out over the Potomac. The river moved slowly, unbothered, reflecting light without keeping it. She envied that. She sat. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel it. The aftermath. It always came later, never during she functioned, after she processed. Her heartbeat slowed, then picked up again. Her breath stayed steady, but her thoughts did not. She hadn't meant to speak about the first time. That memory usually stayed locked away, wrapped in procedures and distance. 19 years old, too young to understand how a single decision could stretch across decades. She saw it again now, uninvited. A narrow street, the smell of dust and fuel, hands that shook not from fear but from certainty forming too fast. She closed her eyes. Survival had demanded efficiency, but memory demanded payment. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Once, she opened her eyes instantly. No startle, no flinch, just awareness. The screen showed an unknown number. A single message appeared. Stay where you are. Her jaw tightened slightly. She didn't move. In her peripheral vision, she noticed motion at the far end of the corridor. A man approaching, not hurried, not slow, purposeful. He wore a uniform, but not one that relied on intimidation. His rank insignia was modest. His posture was. She recognized him from the briefing room. He'd been quiet, too quiet for someone new to that level. Observant eyes, hands that stayed still even when tension rose. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak softly, far enough not to threaten. You weren't supposed to do that, he said. I know. Her voice came out even. That surprised him. He studied her face, searching for something, defiance maybe, or regret. What you said, he continued, it complicates things. She nodded once. Truth usually does. A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, more like recognition. Do you understand what kind of attention that draws? He asked. Yes. And you still chose it. Yes. He exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. Why? She looked past him, through the window, to the slow movement of water. Because jokes make ghosts, she said quietly. and I'm tired of pretending they don't stand behind us." That made him still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The building hummed around them, life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But something had. "They're meeting again," he said finally, "without him." She didn't ask who, she already knew. "They want context," he added, "not numbers, meaning." Her shoulders lifted slightly, with a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't give speeches," she said. "No," he agreed, "you give truths." She met his eyes then, fully. And truths don't always survive committees. He didn't look away, neither do lies, not forever. She considered him, this younger officer who hadn't laughed, who hadn't looked relieved when someone else became the center of attention. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he said, "Captain Daniel Reyes." She nodded. "You don't outrank the people in that room." "No. And yet you're asking me to come back." "Yes." She stood slowly. Her body aligned itself without conscious thought, not defensive, ready. "I won't explain myself," she said. "I won't justify anything." Reyes nodded. "We don't need justification, we need understanding." She took a step forward, then another. As they walked back together, she felt it again, that familiar pull between silence and responsibility. She had lived most of her life choosing silence. It had kept her alive. It had kept others comfortable. But comfort, she knew, was not the same as safety. The briefing room felt smaller now, not physically, emotionally, the air heavier. The absence of the general loomed larger than his presence ever had. Some officers avoided her eyes, others watched her openly. A few looked uncertain. She took her place by the wall again. Captain Reyes stood near the table. "Before we proceed," he said, "I think it's important we understand what was said earlier wasn't an outburst. It was experience." One of the older officers shifted. "With respect, Captain, experience doesn't grant authority over process." Reyes nodded. "No, but it does grant authority over consequence." He gestured toward her. "She's been carrying consequences long before this room ever heard about them." All eyes turned to her. This was the moment she usually avoided, the pivot where stories were expected to become performance. She didn't perform. "I won't list operations," she said. "I won't give you dates or coordinates." Several people stiffened. "But I will tell you what stays," she continued, "because that's what matters." She folded her hands loosely in front of her. "Fear doesn't leave when the threat is gone. It leaves when it's understood. Guilt doesn't come from action. It comes from remembering faces instead of objectives." She paused. "And pride," she added, "is the most dangerous emotion in any room with weapons." No one interrupted her. "I didn't speak earlier to shame anyone," she said. "I spoke because casual words create casual decisions, and casual decisions get people killed." Her voice lowered slightly. "Usually the ones who never get to sit at tables like this." A woman near the end of the table swallowed hard. Another officer cleared his throat. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "The numbers." She looked at him for a long moment. "I regret surviving when others didn't," she said, "but I don't regret doing what kept others alive." The room absorbed that. Captain Reyes closed his folder quietly. "That's all," he said. No one argued. When the meeting ended, they didn't dismiss her. They simply let her leave. That, more than anything else, told her how deeply the room had shifted. Outside, the evening air was cooler, softer. She walked alone this time. Her phone buzzed again. One message. "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." She stopped walking. For a moment, emotion threatened to rise, unexpected, unwelcome. Not pride, not relief. Recognition. She typed nothing back. Some gratitude was too heavy to answer casually. At home that night, she didn't turn on the television. She cooked slowly, cleaned methodically, let routine ground her. When she finally sat down, the silence felt different. Not oppressive. Earned. She leaned back and closed her eyes. The faces still came, they always would. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, they felt lighter. Not because they were gone, but because they had been acknowledged. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives as truth spoken into a room that finally listens. What does it mean to be needed only for what you wish you could forget? Sleep didn't come easily that night. It never did after rooms like that. After words landed and stayed. She lay still in the dark, counting breaths instead of time, listening to the quiet hum of a city that never truly slept. The ceiling fan traced slow circles above her, each rotation steady, predictable, unlike her thoughts. They kept drifting back to the same question. Why now? She had sat through hundreds of briefings before, heard worse jokes, colder dismissals, lighter laughter at heavier things, and yet something about that moment, about the way the general had said her number like it was trivia, had cracked through layers she thought were permanent. Maybe it wasn't the joke. Maybe it was the room. Too clean, too distant from the consequences it discussed, too confident that experience could be summarized in bullet points and sanitized language. She turned onto her side. Survival had taught her how to function without feeling. Living had demanded more. At dawn, she rose before the alarm. Muscle memory, not discipline. She showered quickly, letting the heat ground her, then dressed simply. The same blue t-shirt, the same neutral jacket. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She just didn't believe in armor unless it was necessary. The drive was quiet, radio off, windows cracked slightly, cold air sharp against her skin. By the time she arrived, she already felt watched. Not followed, observed. The building recognized her now. She signed in without comment. A different guard today, younger. He glanced at her name, hesitated, then looked up. "Ma'am," he said, unsure which title to use. She nodded once and kept moving. Inside, Captain Reyes waited near the elevators. "They want you in a smaller room," he said, "fewer people." She studied his face. He looked tired, not physically, morally. "Why?" she asked. "Because some truths don't survive crowds," he said, "and some people don't want witnesses." She exhaled slowly. "That's usually when I leave." "I know," Reyes said, "but this time they're listening." The elevator doors closed behind them. As they rose, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not fear, anticipation. The quiet understanding that once you spoke truth into power, power didn't forget you. The room they entered was smaller. No projector, no long table, just a circle of chairs, 7 people, all senior, all quiet. She took the seat closest to the exit. "Always." One of the men cleared his throat. "We've reviewed your record." She resisted the urge to correct him. It wasn't her record. It was fragments, redactions, interpretations written by people who'd never shared a heartbeat with the consequences. "You've been consistent," another said. She tilted her head slightly. Consistency is a side effect of survival. A woman across from her met her gaze. "We want to understand something," she said. "You spoke yesterday about regret, about pride, but you didn't speak about loyalty." That caught her off guard. "Why would I?" she asked. "Because loyalty is the justification most people use," the woman replied. "For everything." Silence stretched. She leaned back slightly. "Loyalty is easy," she said. "It's belonging without accountability." A few brows furrowed. "I was loyal," she continued, "until loyalty asked me to stop thinking. That's when I learned the difference between obedience and responsibility." One of the men leaned forward. "Are you suggesting command structures are flawed?" She met his gaze evenly. "I'm suggesting people are." That earned a few sharp breaths. She didn't rush to fill the space. "You want to know why I said what I said," she continued. "It wasn't defiance, it was prevention." "Prevention of what?" the woman asked. "Of forgetting," she said. "Forgetting that every decision echoes longer than the briefing that created it." The room grew heavier. "You've been asked back into advisory roles before," one man said. "You declined." "Yes." "Why now?" She paused. Because she was tired of being a shadow. Because silence had started to feel like complicity. Because the ghosts were louder when rooms laughed. "Because this time," she said slowly, "someone listened before I had to disappear." Captain Reyes shifted slightly at the edge of the room. "We're assembling a task group," the woman said. "Oversight, ethical review, ground truth." The phrase almost made her laugh. "Ground truth doesn't like committees," she said. "It makes people uncomfortable." "That's why we want you," the woman replied. She considered the offer, not the position, the implication. Being needed meant being seen. Being seen meant being questioned. Questioned meant being asked to reopen doors she had sealed carefully. "What happens when I say something you don't like?" she asked. The man who'd spoken first answered. "Then we'll have to decide whether we want comfort or honesty." She nodded. "You should decide that now." They exchanged glances. Finally the woman spoke. "We want honesty." She stood. "I don't stay where honesty is optional," she said. Captain Reyes followed her out. In the corridor he spoke quietly. "That went better than expected." She shook her head. "That's what scares me." They walked in silence for a while. "You don't trust it," Reyes said. "I trust intentions," she replied. "I don't trust endurance." He nodded. "People get tired of hard truths." "Yes," she said, "and they start looking for easier messengers." They stopped near the exit. "Why are you helping?" she asked suddenly. Reyes blinked. "Because you're right." "That's not enough," she said. He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Because my sister didn't come home, and the report said necessary." She didn't respond immediately. Then she nodded once. "I'm sorry." "So am I," he said. Outside, the day had warmed. Sunlight reflected off glass and steel. A city built on decisions moved forward without pause. She walked alone again. At a crosswalk, she stopped and waited, watched strangers hurry past, each carrying invisible weight. She wondered how many of them were carrying something they'd never been asked to explain. That afternoon, she went to the range. Not the military one, a small private place on the outskirts of the city. No noise, no pressure. She set up her target, breathed. The first shot went wide. She didn't adjust immediately. She stared at the hole in the paper. Not angry, just honest. Her hands remembered more than her mind wanted to admit. The tension, the patience, the decision. She adjusted slightly. The next shot landed closer. She fired again. Center. She lowered the weapon and let the silence return. That night, as she cleaned her equipment, she felt something unfamiliar. Resolve. Not the kind that came from orders or survival. The kind that came from choosing to stay present. She sat on the edge of her bed and finally allowed herself to think the thought she'd been avoiding. If she stayed involved, she wouldn't just be a reminder of the past. She'd be responsible for shaping the future. That kind of responsibility didn't come with applause. It came with nights like this. Quiet, heavy, necessary. Sometimes the hardest missions aren't assigned. They're accepted, when walking away would be easier, and staying means carrying truth where it's least welcome. What happens when the past stops knocking and starts demanding answers? The call came just after midnight. No warning, no introduction, just a vibration against the quiet that had finally settled into her apartment. She stared at the phone for a long moment before answering, already knowing it wouldn't be casual. Nothing that arrived this late ever was. "Are you awake?" Captain Reyes asked. "I am now." A pause. He chose his words carefully. He always did. "They want you on site." She sat up slowly, feet touching the floor, grounding herself. "Where?" "Southwest, not a base, a facility." That was enough to tell her this wasn't symbolic. This wasn't oversight or theory or moral review in a windowless room. This was proximity. This was consequence. "When?" she asked. "Wheels up in 4 hours." She closed her eyes briefly. The room felt smaller all at once. "I said I wouldn't be operational," she reminded him. "You won't be," Reyes said. "They want your judgment, your presence." Her jaw tightened. Presence had always been the most dangerous thing to offer. "I'll be there," she said. She ended the call and sat in the dark. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing outside. Somewhere a siren faded into distance. She hadn't been back near a live operation in years. Not since she'd stepped away quietly, without ceremony, without exit interviews or handshakes. She told herself it was closure. But closure, she was learning, was often just distance wearing a polite name. She packed lightly, habit again. Clothes folded with intention, no weapons, no gear, just a notebook and a pen she trusted. At the mirror she paused. Her reflection looked the same, but something behind her eyes had shifted, less guarded, more exposed. She didn't know if that was growth or risk. The facility sat low against the desert, barely visible from the air. Designed not to draw attention, designed to disappear. She recognized the logic immediately. Places like this didn't want to be remembered. Inside, the air was dry and cool. Voices were quiet. Everyone moved with the subdued efficiency of people who knew something had already gone wrong and were trying not to make it worse. She met the team in a small operations room. Younger faces mostly, tired, focused. A few glanced at her, unsure what to make of the woman without rank, without uniform, standing at the edge of their mission. "This is her," Reyes said simply. That was all the introduction she got. They were tracking a cell leader, not high-profile enough to make headlines, dangerous enough to keep everyone tense. Intelligence was incomplete, the kind of incomplete that got filled with assumptions if no one slowed down. She listened, asked nothing at first, let the room reveal itself. They spoke in probabilities, percentages, clean language. She waited. Finally, she pointed at the screen. "That village," she said, "why hasn't it been evacuated?" One of the analysts hesitated. "Because we're not certain he's still there." "And if he is?" she asked. The analyst shrugged slightly. "Then we'd have a window." She nodded. "And civilians?" Silence. "They weren't on the slide," someone said. She leaned back. "That doesn't mean they won't be in the aftermath." The room shifted, subtle, defensive. "We're not asking you to approve anything," a senior officer said carefully. "We're asking for perspective." She met his eyes. "Perspective doesn't come clean," she said. "It comes with consequences you can't reverse." She stood and walked closer to the screen. "You're assuming he'll stay," she continued. "You're assuming fear will immobilize him. That's projection." She tapped the image lightly. "Fear makes people move." Reyes watched her carefully. "I've seen this pattern," she said, "and I've seen how it ends when urgency replaces patience." "What would you recommend?" the officer asked. She paused. This was the moment. If she spoke, she owned it. "If you wait," she said slowly, "you risk losing him. If you rush, you risk everything else." They looked at her, expectant, uncomfortable. "So don't rush," she continued. "But don't wait blindly. Send eyes, not weapons. Learn before you decide." "That delays the operation," someone objected. "Yes," she said. "Delay is not failure, it's restraint." Restraint didn't play well in rooms built for action. But this room listened. Hours passed, surveillance adjusted, drones replaced assumptions, data replaced urgency. By dawn, the picture changed. He wasn't there. The village held families, children, mornings unfolding as they always had. No strike, no headlines, no aftermath to clean up. The room exhaled collectively. Later, alone outside the facility, Reyes approached her. "You were right," he said. She didn't respond immediately. "You saved lives," he added. She looked out at the horizon, pale light creeping across sand. "I postponed death," she said. "That's all any of us ever do." He studied her profile. "You don't take credit." "I don't take comfort in it," she replied. They stood in silence. On the flight back, she slept lightly, dreamed of roads that forked endlessly, of decisions that echoed differently depending on who walked away. When she woke, her chest felt tight, not panic, weight. Back home, the city felt louder, sharper, less forgiving. She unpacked slowly, put things away as if returning from a place she hadn't wanted to remember. That night she sat on her floor, notebook open, pen hovering. She hadn't written in years, not because she didn't have things to say, because writing made permanence. Still, she began. Not names, not numbers. Questions. What do we owe the people we never meet? When does restraint become courage? How much silence is protection, and how much is avoidance? She stopped when her hand began to shake. Closed the notebook. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. Being needed again felt heavier than being ignored ever had. Because now, walking away wouldn't just protect her. It would abandon others. She turned onto her side and finally admitted what she'd been circling for days. This wasn't about the general, or the joke, or the room. It was about whether she was willing to stay visible long enough to matter. That kind of visibility didn't come with safety. It came with accountability. And accountability, she knew, had a way of changing everything. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't stepping back into danger. It's stepping back into responsibility, knowing the cost, and choosing it anyway. What does it cost to stay when leaving would finally be justified? The headlines never mentioned her. That was intentional. The operation that didn't happen was quietly filed under adjusted intelligence, and the people who slept safely through that night would never know how close their lives had come to being reduced to margins and probabilities. She preferred it that way. Recognition always felt like a debt she wasn't sure she could repay. Still, something had shifted. It followed her in small ways, the way conversations paused when she entered rooms she wasn't technically part of, the way emails began to arrive without being requested, the way Captain Reyes started asking, not telling. She noticed it most in herself. She was listening differently now, not just to others, but to the part of her that had spent years insisting distance was the same as peace. It was. The task group met again 2 weeks later. Same smaller room, same circle of chairs, different energy, less certainty, more caution. That alone unsettled her. Rooms that lost certainty often tried to replace it with something louder. They discussed a new region, new intelligence, a different kind of threat, less visible, more ideological, the kind that crept rather than exploded. She listened, took notes she didn't look at. Halfway through, one of the younger analysts spoke up. "We've been reviewing prior engagement outcomes," he said, "specifically instances where restraint altered long-term stability." She raised her eyes. "That data set is small," another officer replied, "and difficult to quantify." "Yes," the analyst agreed, "but it exists and it's growing." He glanced at her briefly, not with awe, with curiosity. That was new. They weren't treating her like a relic anymore. They were treating her like a variable. She didn't know which was more dangerous. After the meeting, she walked the long way out, past offices with doors closed, past names she didn't recognize, past a culture slowly recalibrating itself without fully understanding why. Ray's caught up with her near the stairwell. "They're asking harder questions," he said. "Yes," she replied, "which means answers are about to get uncomfortable." He nodded. "They want you to stay on." She stopped walking. "Define stay." "Permanent advisory role, ethics integration, operational shadowing when necessary." She exhaled slowly. "That's not advisory, that's involvement." "Yes." "And when the answers stop being popular." Ray's didn't hesitate. "Then we'll find out who we really are." She studied him. The lines at the corners of his eyes had deepened since she met him. Responsibility did that. "I won't be a shield," she said, "and I won't be a symbol." "I wouldn't ask you to be," he replied, "just present." "Present." The word settled heavy in her chest. "I'll consider it," she said. That night she didn't go to the range, didn't cook, didn't distract herself with routine. She sat on her couch and let the quiet do its work. Presence meant proximity, to decisions, to consequences, to failure. She had spent years learning how to survive absence, how to step back just far enough to keep her soul intact. But survival wasn't the same as living. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I was in that village. My sister lives there. We heard later what almost happened." Her breath caught. Another message followed. "Thank you for seeing us." She set the phone down carefully, as if sudden movement might break something fragile. She had never wanted gratitude. It always felt undeserved, too final. But this wasn't gratitude for what she'd done. It was recognition for what she'd prevented. That felt different. She slept poorly, dreams tangled with memories, faces blurred into one another, voices overlapped. When she woke, her decision was already forming, whether she liked it or not. The next operation tested her resolve. It wasn't dramatic, no immediate danger, no countdown clocks. Just a recommendation. A shift in posture, a suggestion to widen parameters, to accept a higher margin of collateral impact in exchange for speed. "This is within acceptable thresholds," an officer said calmly. She leaned forward. "Acceptable to whom?" A pause. "To the mission," he answered. She shook her head slightly. "Missions don't live with aftermaths, people do." The room tensed. "We can't eliminate risk," someone said. "No," she agreed, "but we can choose who bears it." That landed harder than she expected. One of the senior members frowned. "You're asking us to absorb more uncertainty." "Yes," she said, "because certainty built on harm is false." Silence followed. This time it wasn't reverent, it was resistant. This was the moment she'd anticipated, the edge where patience thinned. She could feel it, the subtle shift from listening to enduring. "This isn't sustainable," the officer said. "You can't keep slowing us down." She met his gaze. "Then don't confuse speed with progress." A few people looked away. Ray spoke up. "We asked her here for judgment, not convenience." The officer's jaw tightened. "Judgment has consequences." "So does avoidance," she replied quietly. The decision went against her recommendation. Not entirely, but enough. She didn't argue further. She'd learned when to stop pushing. Overreach closed ears faster than silence ever had. The operation proceeded, controlled, calculated. And still something went wrong. Not catastrophic, but not clean. The report arrived 2 days later. She read it alone. The language was familiar, passive, careful, designed to distribute responsibility so thinly it nearly vanished. She closed the file and sat back. This was the part no one prepared you for. Not failure. Complicity. She hadn't authorized the decision, but she hadn't stopped it either. That night she didn't sleep at all. By morning, she knew she couldn't continue halfway. She requested a meeting, no intermediaries. When she stood in front of them, she felt tired in a way rest couldn't fix. "I won't stay if I'm only here to make conscience easier," she said. "I'm not a salve." The room was quiet. "I won't be used to say, we considered the human cost if we were never willing to change course because of it." A few heads bowed. "This work matters," she continued. "But if the cost of doing it is pretending restraint is weakness, then we're building something that will eventually turn on us." No one interrupted her. "If I stay," she said, "it's because my voice changes outcomes, not because it decorates them." She waited. Finally, the woman who had spoken to her in the first closed-door meeting nodded. "That's fair." Another man sighed. "It won't always go your way." She met his eyes. "It already hasn't." That honesty shifted something. They didn't promise her control. They promised her weight. It wasn't enough for everyone, but it was enough for her. Weeks later, she found herself in a different kind of room. Smaller, quieter, no screens. A young operative sat across from her, hands clasped too tightly, eyes searching. "They told me to talk to you," he said, "before deployment." She tilted her head slightly. "Why?" "They said you'd ask the questions no one else will." She considered him. "Do you know why you're going?" she asked. He nodded. "Because it's my job." "That's not why," she said gently. He frowned. "Because I can." "That's closer." She leaned forward. "The question isn't whether you can do harm. It's whether you can live with what harm teaches you about yourself." His throat bobbed. "I don't know," he admitted. She nodded. "Good, that means you're paying attention." He looked relieved, confused, human. As he left, she felt something loosen in her chest. This was the work. Not preventing every mistake, but interrupting certainty before it hardened into cruelty. That night, alone again, she stood by the window and watched the city breathe. She thought of the general, the joke, the room that had laughed. She thought of how far that moment had traveled. Truth rarely arrived as thunder. More often, it entered quietly, unsettled a few foundations, and waited to see what people would build in response. She rested her forehead against the glass. Staying hurt. Leaving would have been easier. But easier had never meant better. Sometimes strength isn't proven by what you survive. It's proven by what you refuse to become, even when staying demands more than you ever intended to give. When everything quiets down, who are you left answering to? The final meeting wasn't announced as such. No one said this is the end or this is the moment that defines it all. It arrived like most turning points in her life had, unmarked, understated, almost polite. A calendar invite with neutral language. A room she'd already sat in before. Familiar faces carrying slightly heavier expressions. She arrived early. Sat near the wall out of habit, then moved one chair closer to the circle than usual. It felt intentional, though she hadn't planned it. A small shift. But small shifts were where change usually began. The room filled slowly. Captain Reyes entered last, nodding at her as he took his seat. There was no general this time. No figure whose presence dominated the air. Authority was distributed now, unevenly, uncertainly. That alone said more than any policy revision ever could. The woman across from her folded her hands. "We've reviewed the outcomes," she said. "Not just the operations, the long arc." The phrase caught her attention. Long arc. That was new. "We wanted to ask you something," the woman continued. "Not as an advisor, as a person." The room stilled. She felt the familiar instinct to retreat, to professionalize the moment, to turn herself into something abstract enough to be safe. Instead, she stayed. "What happens when you stop?" the woman asked. "When you step away from this work, what remains?" The question landed deeper than any accusation ever had. She didn't answer immediately. In her mind, images surfaced uninvited. The first deployment, the first life taken, the nights when silence screamed louder than gunfire, the years she'd spent believing distance was the same as healing. What remains? I don't know yet, she said honestly. That's part of why I stayed longer than I meant to. A man near the window leaned forward. We worry about dependence, he said, on voices like yours. She nodded. You should. Then why continue? He pressed. Why not leave before the weight becomes something you can't put down? She met his gaze. Because leaving doesn't mean the weight disappears, she said. It just means you stop deciding where it falls. Silence followed, not resistance, consideration. We're changing structures, the woman said, slowly, inconsistently, but genuinely. She believed her. That surprised her. But structures don't carry memory, the woman added. People do. That was the truth no doctrine could replace. I won't be here forever, she said, and I shouldn't be. Ray's shifted slightly, but didn't interrupt. What I can do, she continued, is help you build something that doesn't need me to survive. The room exhaled. That was the conversation beneath all the others. Legacy. Not in medals or mentions, but in absence that didn't undo progress. Afterward, Ray's walked with her down the corridor one last time. The same one where she'd first stopped after the joke. The same polished floors. The same framed photographs. Different weight. You're leaving, he said. Yes. When? Soon. He nodded, accepting it with more grace than she expected. You changed things, he said. She stopped walking. No, she corrected gently. I interrupted them. He smiled faintly. That was enough. Outside, the city met her without ceremony. Traffic, voices, life layered and indifferent. She breathed it in like someone relearning oxygen. She didn't go home right away. Instead, she drove until the buildings thinned and the noise softened, until the road curved into something less certain. She stopped near a stretch of water where the city loosened its grip and sat on the hood of her car, watching the late afternoon light shift. This was where she always came when decisions finished, but consequences lingered. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Ray's. They asked who would replace you. She smiled slightly. Her reply was simple. No one should. She turned the phone face down. For the first time in a long while, she felt the shape of something like peace. Not relief, not pride, but permission. That night she unpacked her apartment differently, not as someone preparing to leave, but as someone deciding what to keep. She gave away things she'd held onto out of habit. Old gear, old notebooks she no longer needed. She kept only what felt honest. The blue t-shirt stayed. So did the pen. On her final day, she didn't attend any meetings. She walked instead, through neighborhoods she'd never really seen, past people whose lives intersected with policy without ever knowing it. She bought coffee from a place that didn't know her name and sat by the window, listening to conversations that had nothing to do with strategy or threat. Ordinary life felt unfamiliar and precious. At dusk, she returned home and opened the notebook one last time. She didn't write questions this time. She wrote answers. Not to the world. To herself. I stayed when silence was easier. I spoke when dignity required it. I left before my presence became permission to stop thinking. She closed the notebook and set it on the shelf. Later, lying in bed, she let memory move through her without resistance. Faces came, voices followed, but they didn't overwhelm her. They felt integrated. Not ghosts. History. She understood then that redemption wasn't a moment. It wasn't forgiveness granted or earned. It was alignment. Between what you know and what you do. between what you carry and how you carry it, between the harm you've seen and the harm you refuse to ignore. As sleep finally claimed her, one thought surfaced gently without demand. Strength had never been about how much she could endure. It had always been about how much humanity she was willing to protect, even when no one was watching. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak loudly. Sometimes it doesn't speak at all. Sometimes it simply stands when laughter crosses a line, chooses restraint over applause, and walks away having shifted the weight of a room forever. Because in the end, the quietest courage is not the one that takes life, but the one that refuses to forget its value.